Optimizing the HetNet, Key Decision Points for Mobile Network Operators. Mobile network operators are now in the process of determining their network strategies for the next 5 years. In many cases, this involves a move towards heterogeneous networks, or HetNets. These networks will involve a large number of cells based on different technologies and spectrum bands. So HetNets will need to be fully optimized with new tools, including self-optimizing networks. My name is Adlan Fila, and I will be moderating and managing this webinar today. The agenda for today's webinar includes a presentation by Caroline Gabriel, Research Director at Maravedis Rethink. She will be providing her key findings of its Optimizing the HetNet white paper, which was based on interviews with the leading MNOs regarding their RAN optimization strategies. In particular, Caroline will address a critical choice, whether to opt for a third-party multi-vendor solution or leverage incumbent vendor-supplied tools. Accompanying Mrs. Gabriel will be Neil Coleman, Director of Marketing at Amdocs. He will delve into the key role that Amdocs RAN solution will play in this complex HetNet environment. We'll then leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the audience. I would like to introduce Caroline Gabriel, Research Director at Maravedis Rethink, who will be providing an overview of some of the key decision points for MNOs.
Thanks very much, Adlan. I'd like to take the next I'd like to take the next 10 or 15 minutes to highlight some of the key trends that we're seeing in the area of RAN optimization and some of the findings of the survey that we conducted recently for Amdocs. I'll just put myself on full screen. Agenda today, I'll outline that survey and the key findings and then set it in the context of industry trends that we see here at Maravedis Rethink. We talk on an ongoing basis to many types of service providers, including a core research base of about 75 mobile operator groups worldwide. And they provide us with detailed inputs into their plans for network deployments and the business cases those will support, which in turn feed into our 5-year forecasting model for mobile and other networks. And on this occasion, we also conducted 2 specific surveys, which I'll tell you more about shortly. The key areas of findings that I'd like to highlight during my presentation are the evolution of the HetNet and how that affects optimization and the role of optimization, the business case for investing in new approaches to optimization, and finally the emergence of vendor-neutral strategies. And then I'll hand over to hear a presentation from Neil Coleman, as Adlan has mentioned. So first on to the surveys themselves, and we've been conducting mobile operator research for over a decade now. We've seen many changes in the way that mobile networks are built and used. We've seen social media having a huge impact on patterns of usage, now the Internet of Things, as well as, of course, the explosion in data usage, especially video. To some extent, the operator's challenge remains the same: to deploy the network in order to achieve the greatest cost efficiencies while delivering the best overall experience for customers, the foundation of profitability and market share. But the ways that they need to do that are changing rapidly, and I think that's summed up by the graph on the right, which is taken from consensus views from our most recent operator survey, which was the start of this year. And this is looking at capacity investments required to support additional data traffic and other types of traffic, compared with the incremental revenues that can be generated from that data. Using conventional network planning and network approaches to building the network, similar to what we used in 3G or the first wave of 4G, you can see it's a very long time before those revenues outpace the amount of CapEx investment that's going into the new capacity. And that's not even taking account of the operating costs of these far denser networks, which may in some cases be an even greater sum. So with that context in mind, that's the background against which I think we're presenting all the key findings today. This is the challenge that operators need to get those costs down and those revenues up more quickly, or spread them across a larger number of target applications. So we conducted a targeted study of CTO level executives or just below in tier 1 mobile network operators around the world. And in all cases, these were people who had direct responsibility for decisions about network planning and optimization. That was backed up by 2 broader studies. One for Amdocs, which went out to 120 senior executives within different MNO companies in tiers 1 and 2. These were broader based. They weren't all optimization specialists, but they all had a direct influence on RAN strategy. And then that was supplemented by the ongoing studies that we do on the RAN services as I just outlined. To bring out 3 key findings from that, and I'll go into a little more detail on them in the coming slides, but the 3 main themes: new network architectures are needed to address not just the capacity crunch that we hear a lot about, but also the revenue crunch as seen in the graph. These network architectures, however, will only deliver their full promises when they're fully optimized. We are no longer in a situation where we can sort of put up base stations and hope for the best. These are very complicated beasts. And in that context, operators increasingly want multi-vendor networks, for reasons we'll go into, and with multi-vendor networks come multi-vendor tools and management systems. So first, the new approach to building and planning the networks. The new architecture, Madeline mentioned this at the beginning, but is primarily the move to the HetNet. That involves denser networks of smaller cells, certainly, and that's the way to increase capacity and, if done properly, to lower the total cost of ownership by targeting the capacity just exactly where it's needed in a dynamic way. But also important to cost and efficiency is to be able to use any spectrum that's available, and that includes unlicensed, which means not just using the 3GPP technologies, but also bringing in Wi-Fi and various other emerging technologies, such as low-power wide area technologies that are being used in smart cities, for instance. So the HetNet has multiple cell sizes, multiple layers of capacity of a macro layer with 1 or 2 layers of smaller cells typically beneath it, multiple air interfaces and multiple spectrum bands. And in addition to that, operators are trying to move to increasingly dynamic network planning, where capacity can be moved around very quickly and easily as usage patterns change, even perhaps within different hours of day, for instance. And within that also, as well as targeting the capacity where there is the most usage, it can also be targeted at the most valuable users. So it might be, you might prioritize on business users or people with certain service level agreements. So we can see in the graph on the right, these are the business drivers for the HetNet. It's a lot more these days than traditional 3 Cs, cost, capacity and coverage. Those have always underpinned network planning. And of course they remain fundamental. But they're not enough on their own. Just having an efficient network does not necessarily deliver services that will be differentiated from those of your neighbour, your fellow MNO up the road. So we're moving on from those 3 Cs to a 4th C, customer experience. And that is what brings in a whole new approach to optimization and places optimization in a very strategic position. And you can see from the chart that although reducing the cost of data delivery remains the primary business driver for the largest number of respondents, the second reason that they want to move to the HetNet is to enable multi-vendor networks. That's for economic reasons, to have more competition in the ecosystem, more innovation, and to be able to move quickly to new solutions as they emerge, rather than being stuck into a rigid platform. We'll come on to more of that, but it's a very important and perhaps surprising finding from this particular question. Very important also, in the top 5 business drivers, we're seeing targeting capacity where it's required and integrating unlicensed spectrum. Both of these are elements that if we'd done this survey 5 years ago, we would not have expected to see in the top 5 priorities for the mobile operators deciding on their network architectures. So we said that within a very complicated network, with many, many elements within it, optimization becomes critical. It's no longer a nice to have or something that delivers a marginal improvement in the efficiency of the networks, as it might have been in a 2G or 3G macro network. Instead, it becomes essential and very strategic, and therefore different executives within the operators are making the choices about it, and it's being assigned to different budgets and different KPIs. We'll come on to that, but some of the reasons for this, as you densify the network, there are a lot of barriers to linearity, in other words, to getting the equivalent amount of usable capacity as you've invested in terms of extra cells. There are a lot more unplanned cells being involved. A lot of growth of the network will come from relatively viral cells. That's a way to expand the network quickly, but it also reduces the amount of control and forward planning that an operator has. A good example of that are the Wi-Fi home spots that a lot of residents have, which will, when they have a cellular connection, also starting to engage with the HetNet. Of course, interference and spectrum congestion, probably the number one barrier once you start to densify seriously. The use of unlicensed spectrum technologies in itself adds to, of course, to those interference problems, because you can't predict what's going to come into the band. So within that situation, a form of central control remains essential, so that the operator can see what's going on, can flag up problems, but it can't necessarily be all rigidly pre-planned in the way that a traditional network would have been. Without optimization of this modern kind, HetNet really can mean just chaotic capacity. It can deliver a lot less than it cost, and can even cause new problems additional to what a traditional network might have had. Most operators will start, they have adopted a macro coverage-based LTE policy. So that requires one level of optimization, and then they'll move on to the small cell layers. At the small cell layers, when things become very dense, then we start to see automation really becoming very important. So self-optimizing networks, or SON, they've certainly first come to market in the 3G macro layer. But as you can imagine, the more elements, the more hundreds or thousands of elements there are in a network, the more things have to be automated. Manual optimization becomes impossible, at least for quite a lot of the processes involved. I'm sure Neil will explain more detail about that. But automation grows as cell numbers grow, and so although SON is certainly not the whole optimization picture, it plays an increasingly important role as operators roll out their HetNets. And you can see in the graph on the right, this again this is a sort of consensus MNO view of which point does SON become very desirable, and that seems to be at around sort of 18 cells per square kilometre. And when is it absolutely essential? When you get to about 50 cells, really it's impossible to do it effectively without SON. And considering we're already seeing, okay, fairly theoretical demos, but by Qualcomm and so on, looking at 1,000 cells per square mile, these figures are not, they're not futuristic. These are definitely within 4G, not 5G. So following on from that, what are the business drivers for these new strategic optimization solutions? We said it earlier, it's about customer experience, not just efficiency. The two do go together. But see, when you look at the graph on the right, this is one where the MNO optimization specialists were asked to rank their drivers to invest in a RAN optimization solution, one that would cost additional money as opposed to being a bundled add-on. What would make them spend that money, given that a lot of them, are very hard-pressed on their budgets and are not going to spend unnecessary dollars anywhere. The number one reason, the one that came out most prominently among the top drivers, was to improve the customer experience, because so much follows on from that. Reducing churn, being more competitive against another MNO, supporting higher value services. If the customer experience is high, people are more likely to trust the network, say for their business uses, which would carry a higher ARPU, so on. After that, perhaps a little more conventional, reducing the network planning time and cost, but of course the time element is extremely important at a time when operators are really competing with one another to get LTE coverage, and optimizing the network and getting it out quickly may actually reduce the amount they have to spend on sheer hardware. We'll see a bit of that later. Some other sort of modern developments is that optimization is not just confined to playing around with network cells anymore. These tools are feeding into other parts of the network and the operator's activities, into the operation support system, the customer experience management system, data analytics. So a lot of this information that comes out of the network itself while you're optimizing can also be harnessed to understand better what your customer is doing, where weak spots in your network may be in the future, not just now, to move into things like predictive maintenance. So there's a much broader view of what can actually be done with the information that comes out of a network. And optimization, it's driven by new architectures, but as you'll see from point 5, it also enables them. We've seen that a bit with the HetNet. A lot of operators will invest heavily in optimization for the first time because they're moving to a HetNet, but you can flip that and say that without optimization they won't be able to do a HetNet at all. So the two things go together. And within that, which tools are key? We've mentioned the shift to automation and so on. A lot of other new techniques emerging, and particularly, I'd reiterate, the increasing integration of these tools with broader views of the network back in the data center. An important point is that these tools are increasingly seen when they're being assessed within the operator. They're seen in terms of the overall return on investment rather than cost. They used to be generally seen as a cost, but of course ROI is very different, as we'll see in this slide, which explains some of the economics of moving towards vendor neutrality. In the network itself, in the HetNet, there's a strong move towards multi-vendor networks. We see this in all the surveys that we do. And one of the primary reasons why operators are interested in a HetNet architecture as opposed to just densifying a very monolithic architecture is that they think they will be able to kind of break the relationship with just a few equipment providers that they've had in the past, and mix and match in the same way that Wi-Fi operators can do. So with standard interfaces and hardware from and software from all different providers, slotting it in and out as they wish. We'll see how far that dream is realised, and that's for another discussion really. But suffice it to say that the operators are very keen on multi-vendor HetNets and are certainly aiming to get to those. However, if you're building a network that has equipment from several vendors and may at any minute introduce the latest equipment from someone else, there's an issue around the optimization of that, because if the optimization tool comes from one particular vendor, it might, in the operator's mind, be very good at dealing with its own equipment, but less so at handling equipment from other suppliers. So this is really driving the move towards neutral platforms. The downside, the sort of most obvious downside of a neutral platform is that it's procured separately, so it costs additional money, whereas in the past a lot of optimization solutions were bundled and just came as part of the network. However, on the upside, as we say, the operators are looking for something that can deal with any kind of hardware that they choose to integrate into their network, and it can be justified on ROI. So if optimization is becoming more strategic and more essential to business performance, then it makes sense that an operator would be prepared to invest more money in it. We can see the graph on the right shows that the market is still very open. The huge majority of operators at this stage have not made a firm decision about whether their next generation RAN optimization and SON tools will come from their own equipment provider, from a neutral supplier, or a combination. So it's a very open market, and most operators, the majority, are weighing up this question as they weigh up their HetNet architectures, which means it's a deployment time frame over the next 2, 3, 4 years. Lots of opportunities here for all the players in the market, but we can see the general flow. A year ago, we asked the same question of this base. And at that point, about a third of them were firmly committed to a solution from their equipment provider, and just about all the others were undecided. This time, we see only 15% definitely committed to an NEP solution for optimization. We've got similar numbers who are looking for a neutral solution or expect to use a combination of both. And as I said, over 40% who have yet to make up their mind and are formulating their optimization strategies now. One thing that's noticeably a much, much shorter bar than it was even a couple of years ago are the companies that have no plans or no particular kind of thoughts about the subject at all. And that's very telling because it shows that this issue has become extremely important to nearly all operators. And they may not have made up their minds, but they're certainly all thinking about it. So that leads me just to a couple more minutes on the business impact of going for a vendor-neutral option. There are quite a lot of advantages that the operators picked out. The most important of those, or the most often cited, are listed on the graph to your right. Pick out some of them that are interesting. That a third-party supplier, in their view, or certainly about 1/5 of them believed, would be motivated to deliver the best levels of optimization because that would be the only point of their business, whereas a hardware provider's main business clearly is in selling equipment, and optimization may be something of a sideline, or even in some cases a conflict of interest. They're interested in forming relationships with companies that understand their business KPIs. I mean, arguably the equipment providers do that at one level, but they're looking for companies who are very, very specifically geared to what optimization can do and how that can support the business. So going back to the points we picked out earlier about customer experience and so on. There's a sense that an operator may have better control in a relationship with an independent supplier and more able to drive the agenda and the conversation towards their own business needs. And so on. There are others that you can see there, but overall, it's two main factors. It's to enable freedom of choice, multi-vendor networking, and no lock-in in the future. The confidence that be able to phase in and out different equipment as they wish, which all goes with the idea of dynamic capacity and technology. And the looking for very specific expertise and business relationship focused with optimization as the key focus. There are challenges and there are reasons why companies are nervous of moving away from their equipment provider. One is still the pricing and bundling issue, because despite what we said about the shift towards thinking in terms of ROI, there's still a cost issue here. And a lot of habit, a lot of trust in suppliers, and a lot of belief that those established suppliers will be very stable into the future. But overall, there are lots of criteria that are coming into play. But overall message is there's a big new opportunity opening up here. And the opportunity is summed up, I think, by this slide, which is all about the shift in operator thinking. When they're talking about optimization, it used to be a very technical exercise which looked at drive tests and site verifications and so on, and all fed into a fairly inward-looking picture of how efficiently a network could run. These days, operators are looking at how that impacts real-world customer experience, not a sort of technical view of where the hotspots are, but actually what people are feeling in real life. And the very extreme example I always like to use is that the 3 Japanese mobile operators always publish as a key KPI call quality on the bullet train, the fastest train in the world. And they measure it against one another in terms of call instability on those trains. Most operators around the world won't take on the challenge quite as high as the bullet train, at least not in public at this point, but I think it shows where the MNO's thinking is going. At which point I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'm going to hand back to Adlen and then on to Neil.
Thank you, Caroline, for a very insightful presentation. Before we move on to our next speaker, I would like to run a couple of polls. Now that we have the bulk of the audience present, I would like to know, which part of the ecosystem you guys belong to. So please take a few seconds here to tell us about which part of the ecosystem you belong to. Thank you. So we still have people voting. And I'm going to close the poll here and share with the audience. So the majority of you are mobile network operators with 33%, followed by analysts, press consultant at 27%, and finally equipment vendors at 24%. So we have quite a good mix here of participants from the audience. This question from the next poll is probably more geared towards the operators. If you can take a few seconds here to answer the following question: what is driving you to invest in optimization? So you have 5 potential choices here to choose from. You can only select one answer. So please take a few seconds to respond to that poll question. And I'm closing the poll. The majority have voted, and so 63% are indicating that they are investing in optimization to improve customer experience. So there's a clear majority there that's supporting that case, followed by 19% to improve coverage and capacity. Maybe Caroline, Neil, to react to the results of this poll.
Yes, I think I think that somewhat echoes what we've been talking about here. That the traditional measurements of the famous 3 Cs remain extremely important, but operators are starting to take a much broader view of where they need to take their networks.
Yeah, hi, it's Neil. So yeah, I agree on that, and I think it's when we've done similar polls, we've seen more, regional variations, with some regions maybe being a bit more focused on the, OPEX reduction or OPEX control side, but certainly I think the emergence of customer experience as being a key driver for optimization has certainly occurred over the last couple of years. So good.
Great. Well, this is a great transition to your presentation, Neil. Just gave you control, and we're all ready to listen to your presentation. There you go.
So let me. So everyone can see my slides. So I'm not.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So thanks, Adelaine. Thanks, Caroline. I think there's a really nice set of primary research that's gone out here, and it's always sometimes nice to hear what vendors' opinions are, but it's much better to see how operators are thinking, and especially how that the emerging HetNet is really changing operators' attitudes to optimization. And certainly that last poll, with the focus being shifted towards customer experience, really shows the shift in the industry. So my name is Neil Coleman. I'm head of Amdocs Network Solution Marketing, and I'm going to go through the second half of this webinar. So in terms of the agenda, this part of the webinar, I'm going to talk. I'm going to start with talking about optimization and style and how they are critical to network ROI. So go into a little bit more detail. I think really what I want to highlight is that I refer to optimization and SON. So optimization is more than just the kind of fully automated SON capabilities that have emerged over the last 5 years. And optimization itself is a broad set of activities that improve network performance, efficiency, and the business impact of mobile networks as a whole. So I think it's very important that people realize that rigid definitions of SON and optimization are, you need to look at them in a slightly more fluid way. So I'm talking about ROI. I want to talk about that this is not just a future thing. It's not just for the HetNets, and SON and optimization are delivering real impact today. But in light of the research that's coming through, from Caroline, in moving to the future, optimization itself can't stand still. It needs to evolve to continually have the impact that is required. And then I'll try to put it together into conclusions and next steps. So first on to how optimization and so on are critical to network ROI. I think Caroline's elegant chart about how capital investments are outstripping new data revenue paints a very clean, data-orientated picture, but this kind of more chaotic slide shows how Amdocs sees the challenges faced by operators today. And I don't think any of this is unusual. Like everyone, we see like a fundamental imbalance between the cost side and the quality of experience side. All of this being driven by the network demand, which is in turn driving network complexity, all under the kind of aspects of kind of reduced margins. And I think at the centre of the challenge, and these are the two boxes on the top of the slides, is that fundamental imbalance. We've got mobile data growing at 50% to 100% year on year. At the same time, the mobile revenues, though increasing, which is good, are growing at a much slower rate. Now, varies from operators to operators, but if you look at about 50–40% of capex and opex spent on the mobile networks, a substantial investment. But despite this investment, it's still an area that causes the most set of customer experience issues. So 80% of drop calls are due to the access network, and about a third of subscribers are willing to change networks, to get better download speeds. Now, that 80% figure comes from an Amdocs State of the RAN research, where we looked at mobile networks globally, and that 35% figure comes from an end survey of 5,000 subscribers globally. So you can see that the survey results that we did here, about 63% of the people on the call think that optimization about customer experience kind of mirrors the fact that there is a perceived customer experience issue in mobile operators, and that subscribers will churn to get better experiences on the network. So fundamentally what you're seeing here is kind of a mismatch. You're seeing a high investment area, but that high investment area is not necessarily translating 100% into improved subscriber experiences in revenues. And as Caroline pointed out, in some ways the HetNet is part of the solution, delivering more capacity, but it's also part of the problem, increasing complexity and potential operational costs there. So fundamentally, this is the kind of heart of the imbalance, and I think the operators that we speak to, the fundamental picture comes out. This is not an infrastructure thing. Operators are looking to build better networks first, not just bigger, more complicated networks, and this is where optimization comes in. So again, in terms of ROI, so what does SON and optimization give operators? We're just focusing on one aspect, which is the kind of capacity side, so its ability to sweat assets, that is, getting more from your existing infrastructure. If you look at this table from Caroline's research, it shows you how the different aspects of the HetNet are contributing to the capacity increases required by operators. The table itself is split into year 1, year 4, so it shows you the impact that is expected to deliver in year 1 versus year 4 itself. So you can see how the whole HetNet mix, LTE, the deployment of LTE, increased Wi-Fi offload, public small cells, the emerging virtualization of the RAN, new and reformed spectrum, macro upgrades, etc. But I think you can see here, alone amongst these is the entry for optimization SON. And whereas all the others are more of an investment in infrastructure, this is more of an investment in assets, software, services, and processes that work on top of that infrastructure. And of all of these capabilities, SON and optimization, the impact of them increases from year 1 to year 4. So as the benefits of an LTE deployment get exhausted, the need to optimize that infrastructure becomes more important and more critical to the increase in capacity that you get. And interesting, because it's not infrastructure deployment, it's not really defined by some of the more capex and capital investment cycles. So as an overlay, or as effectively an optimization of the existing network, the results can be felt felt more quickly. And kind of to some of kind of Caroline's point, the HetNet brings all this potentially additional capacity, but what operators need to avoid is that kind of the growth of chaotic capacity, so non-predictable capacity that's plagued by interference or lack of coordination between the different elements. And again, this is where the optimization and SON pieces come in. So bottom line, and hopefully not simplifying too much, optimization and SON are the kind of infrastructure-free way of realizing, getting more out of your infrastructure. So again, to that bottom point, sweating your assets, getting a greater capacity from what you already have. So picking up on the kind of immediacy of the impact of optimization of SON, let's look at what we're seeing today in terms of the benefits being delivered. And I think key to understanding the impact is what it does to an operator's network. So when you're looking at optimization and SON, this is the intelligent reconfiguration of network resources, either on a per cell or across a whole region. And if directed properly, it can align coverage and capacity with demand, so only delivering radio resources where they're needed. It can balance load across the infrastructure, shifting traffic from loaded cells, carriers, and technologies to unloaded ones. It can help in the rapid recovery from network issues, both by fixing problems more quickly and compensating for ongoing issues through reconfiguration. And it can help deliver that seamless HetNet connectivity, linking all of these mix of different technologies together to create one customer experience, one experience. Now, I could have used SON definitions to describe these, like CCO, coverage capacity optimization, ANR, mobility load balancing. But I think, again, to kind of stress the point, it's important to recognize that optimization today and going forward will be more than just SON. SON is an absolutely integral piece, but it isn't everything. For example, something like the rapid recovery from network issues is as much about how you recover and compensate from issues across the whole of the network, not just in the radio access domain. Now, when we go from optimization activity to impact, there's lots of chaotic lines there, and you can argue whether some of the lines should be there or not. But there's clearly not a one-to-one impact. So any activity that maximizes coverage, capacity, and network availability is going to improve customer experience. And that goes to showing how optimization can tackle that. 1/3 of customers that are looking to move, or to the point of the poll in today's call. Optimization, going back to the previous slide, can help you sweat your assets. So you can get more capacity, more experience, and more performance from the existing network, which means you can delay capex, or much more likely squeeze more from what you have or what you plan to have. And that's key to kind of shifting that ROI balance. Rapid recovery from issues will help maximize revenues by ensuring the availability of data services, but so will aligning coverage capacity with demand, so making sure you're delivering where the demand is. And interestingly, like seamless HetNet connectivity will clearly improve customer experience, but it's also going to help in that kind of the long-term network transformation, as operators want to ensure that subscribers are not just on the right technology for them, for the subscriber, but also on the right technology for the operator to help them evolve the network in the direction they want to do. For example, transitioning subscribers from 3G to LTE to free up spectrum for LTE itself. So again, focused on the real world side, the impact isn't theoretical, and in these numbers on the right hand side, you can see some of the kind of the figures that we're seeing in the field. Now, obviously, there's a mileage may vary statement here, but clearly the ability to better configure the network, to squeeze more out of the network, is going to have an impact. Either in one example, reducing drop calls for corporate customers in one location by 75%, or reducing congested and loaded cells during busy hour, or through the automation that's also a key part of optimization and so on, accelerating key optimization activities. So it's a real impact today. So moving on from that kind of real impact side, let's talk a little bit how optimization needs to evolve. So immediate impact is one of the key benefits, but optimization in SON can't stand still. As Caroline indicated in her section, there's an inevitable evolution towards the HetNets and 5G. And this will create a new, denser, more dynamic, heterogeneous network environment with potentially, if operators in the survey are to believe, more vendors than before. So ultimately, this points to this kind of evolution that needs to happen. And the operators interviewed are saying this, so this is more data from the research itself. So when asked the relative importance of the 5 economic considerations when choosing an optimization solutions, operators responded differently in 2013 to they did this year. I mean, all operators are looking for some mix of deferring CapEx or reducing CapEx needs, or reducing OpEx, or managing and controlling OpEx, and generating an impact on churn and ARPU, so improved customer experience. But one of the biggest moves and shifts in sentiment the research is showing is that, whereas upfront cost was a key consideration in 2013, ROI is almost now completely dominant. So it feels that operators care less about the upfront costs and care much about the impacts, which again is kind of in line of the shift towards optimization being a customer experience thing. Meaning they're looking for what it delivers to the business, not just having it as a tick box or a capability as part of the infrastructure. And without trying to push this point too hard, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing an unbundling of optimization from the equipment sale or the equipment cycle, more to the point. And operators are really looking for solutions to sweat the assets rather than be effectively part of the assets themselves. Also, as well as the focus on ROI, as optimization evolves, it needs to increase in both breadth and depth. And I think again, Caroline touched on this as a kind of new toolkit of capabilities. So far, when we refer to optimization, it's really been focused on the RAN part of the infrastructure. But a new toolkit is emerging, expanding optimization, touching on areas like the emerging big data, video optimization, new policy capabilities, as well as linking in existing functions like SON, drive testing, call trace analysis. It's amazing how the industry has moved on in the sense that SON is referred to as an existing capability. So this new toolkit clearly offers much more scope and potential for increased impact. However, to get the results, it needs to be harnessed. So in our conversations with operators, we're seeing operators looking to move from a disconnected set of powerful capabilities, but tool-centric or silo-centric capabilities, to approaches that are much more integrated and streamlined. And this approach needs to kind of knit together these point capabilities to streamline the impact of key operational and engineering processes, essentially scaling them up to be HetNet ready. And being HetNet ready means increasing velocity, accuracy, and the impact of key processes. Now, some of these are shown on the right-hand side of the slide. So when we talk about targeting investments, you need to link the targeting investment based on the revenue impact and the prioritization that it has to the business, and integrate that into new planning capabilities. When you're talking about rollout, it's the kind of linking of advanced program management with the ability to understand very quickly the impact of that rollout on the network and on customer experience. So, key to ensuring how the new CapEx investments, when you have to make it, are really brought to market quickly, but also deliver results. When we talk about coordinate optimization, we need to coordinate all of the optimization levers that you now have. There are multiple ways of squeezing extra capacity. Let's make sure that video optimization and self-optimizing networks pull in the right direction and not try to kind of optimize each other counterintuitively. So by pulling the levers in successfully in a coordinated way, you can deliver much better results. And the kind of problem resolution side, moving from, you need to identify, diagnose, and resolve problems across the infrastructure, but also move into things like predictive maintenance to make sure that you're not just fixing things that are broken, you're fixing things before they break. So all of this kind of means more than just tools. It means the kind of centralized, intelligent automation that links all aspects, all of these levers, all of these capabilities that an operator has together to make sure that they deliver the maximum impact, but also in a much more streamlined way to make sure that the benefits are felt rapidly and don't fundamentally increase that OpEx side of the equation. And finally, it needs the right drivers. Again, repeating, but customer experience is coming out as one of the key drivers that we're seeing. And so it's much more about not what to optimize, but how to optimize in the right locations to get the right outcomes. And we've seen obviously through the real world stuff that I've talked about that optimization and so on deliver impacts, improving impacts, but really to get the most impact you have to have the right end goal. And hopefully not too strong to say, but this means abandoning network KPI centricity. And fundamental to all of this is that we don't want to create optimal networks. What we want to do is to create better networks that deliver better customer experiences and, importantly, more revenues to the operator. And all this means driving optimization from new inputs, combining network quality of experience, customer location, revenue, and all these other insights to identify where network resources can and should be focused. So moving away from network KPIs like drop call rate, throughput and availability, and talk about the networks in terms of measuring how you're delivering indoor capacity to corporate customers, how you make sure key customers aren't dropping calls due to poor coverage, identifying and prioritizing transport hubs for investment, and almost key to ROI, making sure that you're delivering capacity where the most additional revenue will be generated, where there's demand and where there's demand that will generate revenue. So, it's about embracing your toolkit, and focusing it correctly to get as much out of the network as possible. And I personally think that we can move optimization from something that's considered very much a backroom activity to something much more strategic to the business itself, and really a business enabling capability. Okay, I think I'm roughly on time. It's kind of into the conclusions and next steps. I mean, I'll run through what the Amdocs thoughts on optimization and so on. And I think the fundamental thing that hopefully stands out is that, and from the research itself, is that operators are looking for better, not just bigger networks, and that optimization and so on is crucial to network ROI both now and in the kind of future HetNets. But and it's delivering real impact now. But it's clear that it needs to evolve, and the network in 2 or 3 years' time won't be the network that you've got now. And this opens up the options for how you optimize multi-vendor networks, who you trust to do that, and who can extract the most from that. Now, I think after this slide, I've got 2 links. One to the download of the white paper that Adelaide mentioned. I'm sure that link will also be shared as part of the webinar itself. But if you want to find out more about Amdocs and our kind of approach to independent ROI-focused optimization and so on, we'd be more than happy to talk. So there are the links. So thank you, everyone, and back to Adelaide.
Well, thank you, Neil. Just as a reminder, the link to the white paper will be sent automatically to all the people that registered to the webinar, but this is a piece of content available to operators, and so fill out the form, and then Amdocs will review the information and send it to the appropriate audience. We can now start the Q&A, and so perhaps I can call on Caroline here to maybe start commenting on the first question here, which is, can you explain more about how operators will justify investing in separate optimization tools when they could get them as bundles with the equipment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the point that Neil and I have both sort of focused on about ROI and changing KPIs. It's not to say that it's an easy decision, because I'd hate to give some impression that operators don't really care about cost anymore. They're incredibly cost sensitive in most cases. So making an ROI case for anything that represents an additional cost compared to the past is a tough one, as I'm sure Neil knows. But it's a question of measuring what they're buying by the return they get, and it has to be seen in the context of everything that they're buying for the RAN. And the fact is that the returns on hardware investment are diminishing. It doesn't matter how clever the architecture is that you invest in and how much you drive the prices down from your vendors. You will hit a ceiling where you're not getting back what you put in, as I think the original graph that we showed illustrated quite clearly. So at that point, if you can get a tool that will either reduce the amount that you need to spend at all on hardware, perhaps by enabling a new architecture or deferring some of the CapEx costs you might have expected, or that will give you dramatically, measurably different results from that hardware in terms of better support for services, more data carried over the same amount of hardware, then actually the ROI becomes fairly obvious. And I think that's the sort of calculations that operators are making because they're being forced to, because they have to justify every base station they put in, and increasingly that justification is coming from squeezing more out of it, which means these kind of tools.
Right. Neil, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I thought that was a good response. I mean, just to add to that, I think you have to demonstrate the ROI, and in a way that companies like Amdocs, we like the fact that it's become an ROI discussion rather than a bundling discussion. I think the ability, when you realise the fact that economics start to favour the fact you can squeeze more from your network, and you optimise the network in ways that improve the experience of corporate customers, it becomes the right type of conversation to have.
Great.
I guess there's a point, Neil, that's interesting as well, that came up in one of the comments from the audience as well. That, of course, some of the equipment providers are starting to offer multi-vendor solutions, and so I'm wondering how, as an independent software vendor, how you sort of see that coming into your market landscape.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you've got things like OSS II, or I'm trying to work on the I's in the OSS part, but I mean, where vendors themselves are definitely talking about collaborating, cooperating, and creating multi-vendor solutions. I think there's going to be, I think vendors themselves realise they're working in a multi-vendor environment, and they have to start embracing it. But I think fundamentally it's looking at the starting points. I think vendors are always, they've got the best, they've got their own objectives, and they're always going to look to, manage and optimize and orchestrate their infrastructure, more effectively than others. And I think if you look at where independents have always come from, independents have always had to survive and cope in multi-vendor environments. Now, that's not to say that vendors themselves won't come out with strong multi-vendor solutions. It's just trying to talk about the motivation and starting points for that approach.
Good points. Let's move on to the next question here, since we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Which are the most important new optimization tools in which the operators are investing, and also what proportion of their optimization activities do they expect to be automated? I want to go first, Neil.
I think Caroline could do a good job answering that from the research. But I think, Caroline, if you answer, and I can add commentary.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think we shouldn't forget the good old traditional tools, or drive tests have not gone away, as I think we know. So that there's still a bedrock. But I think where the growth areas are, for me, or for the research that we see, I think it's that sort of intersection layer that we mentioned earlier, where the pure RAN optimization and planning tools meet the OSS and other tools that maybe that are further up and that have a bigger view of the network, the whole network. And I think just looking at terms like backhaul SON is an interesting example of that. That suddenly something that was devised very much as a RAN, a very modern RAN tool, and as Neil said, is now somehow being referred to as something that's established, even though very few operators have yet deployed it. SON is now extending itself beyond the RAN into backhaul and other parts of the network. So I think that the real growth is coming there. It's let's optimize, but let's optimize end to end, and let's integrate with the OSS and with all the other tools that we use, and let's feed the results of that into customer experience management, and so you get a holistic view. I think it's a lot harder to achieve that than to talk about it, but I think that's where the growth is coming from.
Yeah, I agree. That's a kind of cop out, but I think I think definitely agree with that, and also the sentiments around the kind of customer centricity. So this is something that emerged 3 or 4 years ago, but is getting stronger and stronger. So moving away, so as Caroline said, you're moving towards much more end-to-end optimization, but also moving to optimization that's driven driven and influenced by things outside of the network domain itself. So there's been a very distinct rise, over the last 3 or 4 years on customer-centric optimization. So optimizing coverage and capacity where customers are, where certain segments of customers are, and likewise. And I think that's when you look at the kind of the asset sweating side, one of the ways you can sweat assets is really by having those assets give you coverage and capacity where it's actually needed. So that move to the customer centricity, revenue centricity is a significant trend from our side, as well as that end-to-end shift.
Excellent. We do have a lot of questions coming in addressed to Amdocs, and we probably won't have time to answer all of them, but we can give it a shot to a final question here, and that is your software going to work with all of the OSS systems at the different operators? I'm not sure whether you can answer that.
No softball questions here. So yeah, the short answer is absolutely yes. I mean, if you look at where Amdocs and the companies that acquired Actix and Cellsite, where Actix and Cellsite have come from, are working in multi-vendor environments, both on the network infrastructure side and the various systems that they integrate. Obviously, when you look at the kind of bigger transformation that needs to occur within the network and optimization domain, it means integration with many more different types of systems. And we kind of, it's almost that Amdocs provides Actix and Cellsite that bigger scope, the scope to bring in more of these different data sets, as much as having existing infrastructure in this space, existing assets.
Great. I think we have pretty much reached the top of the hour. So I want to thank both of you for your excellent presentations and answering some of the questions that have been coming in. I'll reiterate that the event has been recorded and available for replay in the next 24 hours, along with the link to the white paper available to operators. I want to thank Amdocs for sponsoring this webinar. I want to thank the mobile network for helping us promote this webinar, and to all our audience for participating today. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you all.
Thanks, Adelaide. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.